This conference will now be recorded.
Hello and welcome to BAASS Connect Virtual 2021. This session is part of today's event on human resources and payroll. My name is Anna McNally, and I will be presenting this session on Sage 300 Payroll. This session is geared for those looking for a robust payroll solution and for existing Sage 300 payroll users. Please post your questions in the question box located on the right-hand side of your screen, and we will answer them during our Q&A session. Looking at the slide, what road best describes your payroll? Hang on, it's a roller coaster ride, or maybe just a few twists and turns, or maybe it's straightforward, or could be all three of them, depending on the situation. Well, Sage 300 Payroll can handle all three scenarios, from generating a simple to a complex payroll, we'll review the payroll process in Sage 300, from employee maintenance to pay to reporting. What can you expect from Sage 300 Payroll? You can expect to generate web ROEs, e-filing for T4s, T4As, Revel A1s, data entry tools, shortcuts, guidelines to help users navigate and understand their system. Easy to use for experienced or new payroll practitioners. Process pay and report on your payroll data with today's most comprehensive customizable payroll software for small to medium-sized businesses. Sage 300 has various tools and shortcut keys to aid in data entry. You can use your keyboard to navigate the system, or if you prefer, you can use a mouse. Sage has robust help tools such as user manuals and checklists that are easy to find and use. Here's some news from Sage. Sage plans to release some payroll enhancements in 2022. Payroll enhancements will cover US and Canadian payroll. One of the new enhancements would be to auto-populate Canadian income taxes, such as provincial and federal tax, and for US, federal and state taxes. Right now, a user has to manually insert provincial and federal taxes into the employee profile. Users will be able to assign a default payroll frequency, which will automatically be selected when they calculate payroll. Users will be able to have a button on the Calculate Payroll screen that will allow them to print their pre-check register from within the same screen. And users will have the option to record comments on the employee's master record, similar to comments that exist in accounts payable or accounts receivable. These comments can be used to track information for employees, such as if an employee requests changes to their TD1, you can record a comment with a date in their profile. Other payroll enhancements to be released are the system will support multiple T4A boxes, such as box 028, 104, 105, and 103. You will be able to generate one ROE file that contains more than 99 ROEs. Previously, it was a limitation, but that limitation will be removed in the new version. The system will also default the province of employment to blank. Currently, the province of employment is set to Alberta, which if you don't pay attention when you set up a new employee, can cause issues for TIFO reporting. So let's talk about the 7 or 7.5 steps in Sage 300 payroll. The half is the optional. So to run a pay in your Sage 300, really there's 7 steps. And the first step is to add, modify your employee record, add, modify, or import time cards. If you do have a time and attendance solution, perhaps instead of importing the time cards, those time cards will get updated automatically between your time and attendance and Sage. You can run your calculate pay. You can preview your pre-check register in detail or in summary. The next step would be to email or print your pay advices, or you can issue checks. You would create your EFT file. So if you pay your employees electronically through direct deposit, you would create the file and then upload the file to the bank. And lastly, an optional is to print payroll supporting documents for the pay period for which you're running. And I say optional because in Sage 300, you can choose to keep multiple years worth of history, and those supporting documents will always be there as long as they're not cleared. So you can keep 5 years worth of history, 10, 99, those reports will be there. So let's take a look at Sage 300. Let's actually log in, launch the program, and have a look at it.
This conference will now be recorded.
For today's session, I'm logging into Sage Sample Company, and this is version 2022. And I'm going to log in as a different date. So when you log into your Sage 300, the user that you log in will have predefined security assigned. In my particular user, I can access Canadian payroll. So the navigation of Sage 300 is at the top. We have our ribbon, which allows you to navigate between companies, change your print destination, change the look and feel of your screen, as well as you have the help. And during our PowerPoint presentation, we talked about help, some shortcuts and some tools that you can find within Sage 300, and one of them was a checklist. So if you're setting up Sage for the first time in payroll, you can actually print a checklist. So there are 2 ways to access the help. One is to click on the green button at the top of the ribbon, and the other one is to use your F1 key, which is your function key, and I'll show you that one next. But to access a help topic, you can click on the help, and you can access help topic. By clicking on it, it will launch another window, and in that window we'll have all your user manuals and information on your Sage 300. But if you want to look for a checklist under the search, you can just type in checklist, and it will return results. And in this case, I want to look up how to set up my Canadian payroll. And here's an example of the checklist that can help me and guide me in setting up my Sage payroll. If I want to print this out to have a hard copy, I can click on the print button on the right-hand side. Also under the help, before we move off of it and look at the F1 option, is you can directly go to product in documents, which is your manuals. And down here, there's a place there where you can submit product ideas. So if you have an idea for Sage to improve Sage payroll, post your ideas, and you can also view what others have posted, and you can vote on them. And Sage does use these ideas when they're launching their product enhancements. So for example, the enhancements that we looked at in the PowerPoint could very well have come from customers like you who submitted product ideas. So to access the F1 key, or how to use the F1 key, is be in the screen that you have a question on and then hit your F1 key. So when we're looking at the menu for Canadian payroll, we have menus that will take us to action icons, and then we have menus that will take us to reporting icons. And the action icon and reporting icon for the topic are usually next to each other. So for example, if you want to update your employees, you would go under payroll employees, but if you want to print a report, then you would go to payroll employee reports. If you were processing payroll under payroll transactions and wanted to print out transaction reports, then you would select on payroll transaction reports. So if we click under payroll employees, how to access our user F1 key is, I'm just going to open up this one screen here. So the screen I'm in is payroll employee activity. If I want to know what the screen does, I could hit my F1 key on my keyboard, and it will launch the help on that particular topic. So for example, I was in employee activity and it opened up the help on employee activity. So it's great to find out information about the screen that you're in. And that is whether it's a report or whether it's an action icon, it will tell you what it's for, how it's to be used, and if there's additional information associated with that icon, then you also have what's called hyperlinks that would take you to different areas. You can view this anytime, and you can also print these topics. So we are going to be setting up an employee in a few minutes, or we're going to be looking at how to do that in a few minutes, but I want to review a couple of icons or menu items here that are underutilized. For any of you who use Sage 300 Payroll, you can use these two menu items down here at the bottom: assign earning deductions to employees and update earning deductions for all employees. So these are actions that you could use when you create a new payroll code, for example, a new earning or deduction or reimbursement, or whatever category of a code that you create. You can choose to assign that to all of your employees or set criteria of the type of employee you want to assign them to, instead of going into the employee area and assigning them one at a time. So it's just a quick way for you to assign new codes to employees using that tool. And the other one is to update existing code. So if you have an existing code, but there's something that's been updated. So an example would be a rate has changed, or you don't want it to calculate anymore. Maybe you want to stop it from calculating for a pay period or indefinitely. You can use the update earning deduction for all employees to do that without having to go into each individual employee and updating it manually. Another thing is, between these two, or when you run either one of these, when the function is completed, it will give you the option to print out an audit report, and that audit report will identify the employee, the change or the addition, the before and the after, so that you can have that for your records. There's also this area here that I want to bring your attention to, which is user security setup. So this is a place where you can go to identify what Sage user, what Sage payroll user has access to what employees. So for example, if you've got an employee, if you've got two payroll frequencies in the system, you have a biweekly payroll and you have a semi-monthly payroll, and you have two different individuals that run those pays, you can actually assign the different employees to each one of those Sage payroll users, so that if I'm the semi-monthly payroll practitioner, I only see the semi-monthly payroll employees. So it's a good way to have one payroll system, but give different access to the employee. If an employee calls and they want to know quickly what their accrual is, employee activity is a quick lookup where you can go in. It's not an action icon where you can go add, modify information, but it's more of an inquiry icon where you can go in and view quickly information on their year-to-date totals, their current pay or pay in the past that they have a question on, as well as their accruals. So it's a quick way for you to look up employee information. So to set up an employee, you've got two options when you set up an employee. You can set up an employee filling out from the first field and going through all individual tabs, or you can use what's called a template. So to access the template, once you put in the employee ID number, and the ID number could be alpha, could be numeric, or a combination of. When you accept that field, it then gives you the option for a template. So if you want to use templates, what I recommend that you do is create templates based on jobs or based on province of employment or departments. So for example, you can create a job called clerk, and that could be the number that you give it. And then once you set up the information on these various tabs and save it, you can then, when you add a new employee, the clerk could be the employee template that you use. So when you set up an employee, you have various information. You have a place there where you can put in their email address so that if they want to receive email notifications for example, their pay statements. We have a way of classifying employees and identifying their position, their manager, if there's an RPP plan, what the number is, and workman's comp, it supports multiple workman's compensation groupings and rates. The system also supports cost center reporting. So pay is where you would go in and you would add all the different earning deduction codes. And I'm actually going to select an employee that has information here. So I'm going to click on my Finder and select an employee. So here's an example of employee who's got a pay frequency of monthly, and these are the earning and deduction codes, accrual codes. You can also do reimbursements within Sage 300 that don't impact any tax reporting. Your taxes, so your taxes can be modified to have additional tax deducted from an employee. There is a box there for other where you have additional information that you can record. Sage does have a place called optional fields that if there is an area or if there is a need for tracking information and Sage does not have a predefined box, you can create one and store the information. And for your EFT, your electronic transfer funds, so an employee first starts, they might not have banking information, in which case you can just issue them a check. But once you do have the banking information, you can record it and you can have more than one bank. So you can deposit a pay into more than one bank. The different methods of calculation would be a fixed amount or a percentage of net or percentage of gross. So when we looked at our payroll processing, the first one was add modify employee. The second one was add modify time cards if your organization requires time cards. If your organization is just strictly salaried employees with have a set working amount of hours, you don't have to have a time card. A time card is used for items that change from pay to pay or items that might change for the odd pay. A time card could be reusable, which means that you create it and every pay period you modify it, or you could have non-reusable, which is attached to a pay period, and once the pay period is completed, it will be removed. So once we add, modify time cards or import them in, then the next step would be to calculate our pay. So to calculate your pay, you would put in your pay period end date, your check date. You can calculate pay using an employee selection list. So that would narrow down to a list of the employees that the pay is going to be calculated for. You have an option here for frequencies. You can have multiple frequencies within one pay. So you could have some employees that are paid biweekly, some that are paid monthly. The system will handle both. In this situation, I'm going to run a pay for my monthly employees. I could further break down my selection and run my pay for just one employee, or I can run pay by classification of employees. So it's very flexible. So when I process pay, if there are any warnings, I will get an error warning report that I could view. And in this particular case, it's giving me some information about sick leave. And this warning is just telling me that the maximum amount of accrual has been reached for these employees. So it's for information purposes, but sometimes the exceptions are things that you have to fix or change. So at this point, I could print what's my pre-check register. So a pre-check register is a report that will allow you to review the outcome of the pay that you ran. You can view it in detail or you can view it in summary. You can further break it down and sort it by employee name or classification or by frequency. So if you're running 2 frequencies on this pay but want to see the reporting separately, you could select payroll frequency. And some of the sort bys will give you then by a second sorting option. So for us, we're going to select by employee number. And I'm going to my print preview on the screen. So if I want to print this to a printer, I can. If I want to export it out to Excel, I can. Or if I wanted to save it as a PDF, I can do that as well by using these action icons on the top left-hand corner. So if my payroll is ready to progress to the next step, I can do that. Or if I realize that there was an error in my report, either my summary or my detailed view, I could go back, fix that, and go to the next step. So after my calculate pay and my reporting is to issue checks or to issue pay advices. You would select the date for which your pay period end is, and you do have options here to select all checks. So if all the people on your pay are either all EFT or all checks, you don't have to go any further. You can just let it default to all checks. But if you do have a combination of some who are going to be electronic transfer of funds and some that are physical checks, you can do each one individually. That way you can have checks ready to issue the checks, or you can have ready and email the employees that have notification by email. I can have a bank that's default, but in this case, I might have different banks for different pay frequencies or different types of pays. I'm going to select a bank, and over here, I can have some messages that will print at the very bottom of my pay statement. So the next screen will allow me to select a form, and the form could be a check or it could be a pay statement, and I can pick and choose the different forms that I use. And I'm just going to show in the screen what the standard out of the box advice is ships with the program. And this can be modified. You can include the company information, you can include a logo, and of course you can make this, you can change the look and feel of this. So once you've emailed or you've printed your checks, the system will ask you if the checks were printed correctly. Once you say yes, that's when it updates the system. That's when it updates the employee record with history, the T4 information, CRA information, ROE information, all gets updated. If you make a mistake, you can still say no and go back to the previous steps to fix your mistake. But if you do happen to say yes, and then you realized after the fact that you had an error, you can go under your bank services and reverse those checks and reissue them quite simply and easily. So once that's done, I can then generate my file to the bank. When I generate the file to the bank, it's fairly simple. I select the pay period end date for which I want to generate the file for, where I want to save the file. But I want to bring your attention to this box here, and that is if you're generating your check, and let's say your pay defaults to a Friday, but Friday happens to be a holiday, you can actually make the funds available the day before by changing that default and putting in the date that you want the check to be deposited. So once you generate the EFT, it actually has a report that auto generates when it's finished. You can choose to print it or just view it and save it, and you can access it at a later time. So now my next step would have been I'd log on to the bank and upload my file if I pay my employees with direct deposit. So the reports that I could print out, the supporting reports I could print out would be reports such as the CRA remittance, workman's compensation remittance, any other third-party remittances reports that I have to either print and send along. For example, many medical or pension reporting that I need to print the values to send along, I can print those. But like I mentioned earlier in our PowerPoint, the system can keep up to 99 years worth of history. And if not cleared, I have access to that history at any time. So I can go back at any time in the past and print a report from a previous year. The information will be there. So that is our payroll process in a nutshell.
This conference will now be recorded.
Well, I hope that I was able to answer some of your questions or show you some of the features of Sage 300, and for users to answer some of your questions that you might have had of some of the functionality. And thank you very much for joining my session today. Any questions, please post them in the question area.
This conference will now be recorded.
Thank you very much for joining me today in our session.